So there are kind of two different ways that most foundations give money. One is a unrestricted, or what they call operating support grant, which basically means we're going to agree to a few really key measures, and you're allowed to use that money for whatever you need to do to get to those measures. You can build capacity, you can hire people in your staff. It's whatever operational or other you deem appropriate. So it's really trusting the entrepreneur, the leader, and we believe a lot in that level of funding, because we say, you know what, the entrepreneur, if they have a proven track record, if they've built some success and we're trying to help them scale, they know better than we do where those investments should go. The alternative is a restricted funding, or maybe a more traditional grant, which has to be used for a specific program or purpose, usually has a much more intricate set of metrics and reports attached to that. Every foundation or funder has a different set of metrics or reporting requirements that really becomes hard for the entrepreneur to have to respond to. And that, we feel like, is the majority of funding available today to social entrepreneurs, and that shouldn't be. We should trust, we have to build the right metrics and measurement systems, which is very important, but we can still do really flexible, unrestricted funding and get to the goals that we're trying to get to. So we were recently talking to an organization called Apopo that works in Africa and in other places that have landmines, and their whole purpose is to train rats to work on sniffing out, because rats have an incredible sense of smell, to sniff out landmines before, obviously, they take human lives. And they, came into our portfolio, and they said, I was talking to Bart, who is the CEO, and he said, we came into the portfolio, they're about a $1 to $2 million organization. Our investment, our unrestricted funding, which at that point was a little over $1 million, allowed them to expand their program, really go into depth in terms of hiring, choose which operations they were going to set up in different countries in Africa. And now they're an $8 million organization. And he said within 3 to 6 years, that was the inflection. That was the kind of infusion they needed. They knew they had a great track record. They had these trained rats that were operating and doing wonderful work, but they needed that money to be able to test and learn about how they could scale the program. And now they're doing tremendous new work, even helping the rats test for tuberculosis and other diseases, in labs. So they're learning, and that whole research and development and quick turnaround, what we call agile, approaches, wouldn't have happened if they didn't have flexible funding. So they're on a different growth trajectory and doing very well, and that's one example of an organization that I think really benefited from that. The other example is they are even looking at rats testing for drugs and disease in airports. So you could see, and probably behind the scenes and not in the public facing, walking around, inside the airport, but, where the luggage and the tarmacs and the different, transition areas are. If there's one point I think flexible funding helps bolster, its enhanced creativity and, ability to think bigger versus smaller and get deep into one program, and, so that we see as an advantage too. So we look for, we call it the 4 I's. We look for impact within an issue that's relevant. So some, issue relevance around that impact, right? It can, an inflection point within that ecosystem and the actual innovation itself. So for us, that frame, all our sourcing for social entrepreneurs, and ultimately how we bring new organizations into our portfolio and fund them, how we even look at existing organizations within the portfolio and refunding them, that's the frame we look at. So we have a pretty detailed process, scorecards that we keep, approaches, updates, trying to get real insight, real time, to keep our information current. But it's a constantly evolving process, but anchored in those 4 areas. So one of the organizations that's pretty exciting is called, that recently won the Skoll Award, is Global Witness. And Global Witness is an organization based in the UK that works to really make illegal activities transparent. So where there is corruption and particularly where there are natural resources. So whether it's, blood diamonds, whether it's illegal logging that's stripping the natural resources in particular countries. They start out as journalists, and they posed as poachers or timber buyers, and they go in and really do incredible investigative research on these issues and who the players are and map where the money goes, and ultimately publish results and work with policymakers to say, here's what's going on. We have the proof of how these transactions are being done, and we see the tremendous atrocities that are happening on the ground with the people that are affected in the local countries. So they are an organization that we think is very disruptive, that looks at a global problem, which is greed and corruption and stripping natural resources, and know that our dollars, the impact that they have achieved over time. They're not a startup. They've been around for many years, building their case, building their approach, building their relationships with policymakers and people on the ground. The issue is at an inflection point. The human rights, I think, issue of whether it's the Khmer Rouge, whether it's countries in Africa that we see have tremendous natural resources, and yet their people are suffering tremendously. You see the juxtaposition and the ability that you see the increased media. So right now, if you look at the 4 eyes applied to Global Witness, you'd see the impact that they have, the data that they've collected over a 10-year period on key issues of corruption and illegal activity. And then you look at the inflection point of human rights and the ability for people to be more active with social media, be able to tape, get data and information out to the public or to key people at the right time. You look at the issue of human rights abuse and the dramatic pull for action. And you look at the innovation, which for them is this approach that they take, not just journalism and not just human rights, but blending those two to really have a unique approach.